I mentioned last time the popularity of a book entitled The Gravedigger File by Os Guinness that I said deals with, especially in the first half, in my opinion anyway, some of the issues and some of the terminology that we have used thus far in looking at secularization, because Os Guinness happens to be a British social scientist himself. We're going to, by the time we're through, go far beyond what Guinness has to say in his book, because his book is intended for a certain audience and can only go so far. One of the important parts of our study leading up to secularism has been to ask ourselves the question, what causes secularism? And I've already given that to you, secularization. That is the historical process that precedes secularism. Then I think a second very important part of our study, we're looking at secularism, or we're headed toward that, as the umbrella-ism, or philosophy, or Weltanschauung, the worldview that encompasses all of the other lesser American philosophies today, would be what then causes secularization. We're going to spend a few weeks on this, which I think is a very interesting and very fascinating subject. First of all, what causes secularism, that's secularization. And we've spent several messages now trying to define for you what secularization is, and I hope that you understand that and that you won't forget that. Now, what causes secularization? One thing leads to another, which leads to the other, secularism. Various things have been suggested. Some people say Renaissance humanism. Other people say Enlightenment rationalism. Well, we've looked at both of those, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period, and these have been factors. But the way I see it, and the way not only I see it, but some other people see it, one thing, and one thing only, stands out as the cause of secularization. And before I even give you that, let me just backtrack a little, because we're not just studying this to say when we get through, oh, well, that was nice, that was interesting.
Amen.
We looked last time at why we might be opposed to secularization, that process, and why we might be happy with it. The only sense in which we're happy with it is because it's taken away from the church what the church never had the biblical right to have in the first place.
That's right.
But really, we don't agree with secularization because it's gone much further than that. It has now challenged the church on its own turf. The church doesn't have the authority or the right to say anything about anything unless it just agrees with the world. It can stand behind the world and hold on the world's coattail and say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, agree with the world. But it can't pronounce infallibly from an inerrant word of a transcendent God on matters that are eternal and matters that are spiritual and matters that are so important, the most important ones of all.
Amen.
So I think it'll be very important then, since we see that we are 100% opposed to secularism, which is an anti-God, anti-supernatural philosophy that's taken over this country. We are maybe 90% opposed to secularization, that process which has stripped the church of some things it didn't deserve to have, but of things that it must have. And that is the right to pronounce from the Word of God infallibly on spiritual, eternal, transcendent matters. So we're opposed to secularization. What is that going to say then about what leads to secularization? It becomes more touchy, you'll see as we go along. I think that we are opposed without qualification to secularism, the top of the ladder up here. Opposed almost that much to secularization. I don't think it's opposed as much to the next thing, which is going to be our topic this morning and for the next few weeks, but we cannot just say that this third thing down here, oh, no problem, like most people do, 100% in favor of it, because what it does is lead to secularization, which leads to secularism. So I don't think that it's Renaissance humanism or Enlightenment rationalism. I think those things contributed to the thing that brought secularization, and that is modern technology. Modern technology. has given man the wherewithal to rid himself of pre-scientific, pre-civilized religious notions. Modern man, modern advancement always serves to, and I put this word in quotation marks, liberate man from religious understanding. Of course, as the Bible teaches, it's only a question of to whom you're a slave. You've never been liberated from religious understanding unless you've been liberated from religious understanding to become a slave of modern technology. You're always going to be a slave of one thing or the other. The way I see it, one thing only stands out as the culprit, the cause of secularization, modern technology. Now, we can't look exhaustively at this subject. Perhaps next Sunday morning I'm going to give you a little short bibliography, maybe somewhat annotated, on the subject of modern technology, which is not the same as science, but the two really go hand in hand, along with those going hand in hand with secularization. And I'll mention some things at the conclusion of our study this morning probably. But I have a lot to say that I've said in other ways before, and I've wanted to say more strongly. Now I'll have that opportunity. Amen. And this will tie in also with other things that we'll eventually get to, still here in Christian ethics and still here under the mental side concerning community. I think that is a very big emphasis in the Bible, and it needs to be emphasized today because it's so de-emphasized. Individuality has been lifted to heightened levels today. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go along. So let's start with some introductory comments concerning modern technology. Technology and secularization go hand in hand. Technology is the father of secularization. You cannot, this is an impossibility. This is a cannot. You cannot have one without the other. Now that's what is frightening. You cannot have one without the other. Where technology is openly welcomed, and it's not just openly welcomed in the civilized Western world today, it is worshipped today. Productivity is worshipped today in a way that it has never been in history before. Of course, people in olden days didn't have the wherewithal to produce as people can produce today, but they weren't as concerned about it as people are today. And I just don't know how, for the life of me, that these important people out there in all types of business institutions can even stay and keep their sanity when it is a dog-eat-dog world. You trample over people to get to the top. You're a big supermarket and you come into a small town, and supermarkets, because of the way they're set up, they inevitably can put out more goods and turn a better profit than a Ma and Pa grocery store on the corner can. They will come in and run out all the other people in town. Now, of course, what they say is, well, this is a capitalistic country. It's free. If we can produce it cheaper, more of them better, well, the customer has a right to that. Well, see, that's only one aspect of the whole broad spectrum of productivity and people and the relationship, goods and services and buying and so forth. What about the livelihood of the elderly couple who run that store? What about the relationship in the community? What about the closeness of the community that revolves around Ma and Pa stores there? Well, of course, that's never, or hardly ever, and it's so rare I think I can say never and be safe, it's never taken into consideration by the big supermarkets or whatever we're talking about. I'm just using that as an example. They just do for a couple of years their little test marketing in the area there. They find a store, they find some land and buy it, and that drives up the price of land all around. They just rush in there, they throw up something. They say, good for the community, because look, we hired all of these people, all these new jobs now, all these, ideas and rationale. And, by the time we get through with the study, you're going to say, well, what should we do about it all? I say there aren't any answers to it. We have gotten ourselves into a problem with modern technology that there's really no way out of. What can you do? Just burn all the cars and go back to pre-electric days and all of this? Well, that no one would ever do that. Not enough people would do that to make any sense. Can we keep going the way we're going? No. The world's on a suicide run right now. Western society's on a suicide run. We can't go back. We can't go forward. I don't have an answer to it. That is an answer for the whole world. I have an answer for myself personally, but I don't have an answer for the world out there. I've said before, I don't think that you can. As a politician, there are no answers. You've got the environmentalists on one side, you've got the businesses on the other. And they're both citizens of the community. They both have their rights. They're both free. Who are you going to listen to? And you can't listen to both. The environmentalists can't win and the businesses win at the same time. That's impossible. So I think that the world with modern technology, you've heard me say some of these things before, has got itself into a situation that it simply can't get out of. It cannot go forward. We're on a suicide run now, and it cannot go backward. We'll come later to what I think maybe our own personal Christian attitude should be to it all. But where technology is openly welcomed, I'll finish that sentence, secularization will immediately follow. Where it is resisted, technology will be less easily detected. See, technology means what you're wearing this morning, how we're heating and lighting this building, and everything that we're doing here, modern technology. Where technology is openly welcomed, secularization will immediately follow. Where it is resisted, technology will be less easily detected. In other words, you simply cannot say yes to technology and no to secularization. Of course, a lot of people wouldn't want to say no, but let's say religious people, church people, you cannot say yes to technology and no to secularization. Why? They come together. If one comes, both come. You can't say, yes, I'll invite technology in. I want all the conveniences and so forth, but I don't want the de-emphasis on the transcendent, the supernatural, the eternal. You can't have that. As soon as you've got modern technology, you have nothing but an emphasis on the here and the now. That's what technology is all about. It's an emphasis on the here and the now. We're going to make money now. We're going to make these goods now. It's, of course, never concerned itself with eternal matters. Maybe the future, but the future in this life, though, not eternal matters. So you cannot say yes to technology and no to secularization. Modern advancement always serves to, quote, liberate man from his religious understanding. And we looked at that in several parts earlier of the demise of religion. God is dead. Well, that was a fairly accurate slogan from what they meant by it in the 1960s. Of course, they didn't mean God was dead, but religion is dead. Christianity is dead. Not completely, thank God. It never will die out. But relatively speaking, you compare the 1960s and 1980s, if you will, with earlier times, they're not far off the mark with their liberal, God is dead, Christ is dead, Christianity is dead philosophy. Because modern advancement serves to do that. It liberates man. If you remember some of the early pages I read from Harvey Cox's The Secular Cities, always talking about liberation, 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 freedom, freedom, freedom. It liberates man from culturally conditioned, pre-civilized religious understanding. And it's highly unlikely, I said earlier, that where technology is resisted, then secularization will be less easily detected, vice versa as well. It's highly unlikely, however, that any people will ultimately resist technology. And I'll tell you why. It's because it inevitably brings carnal enjoyments. If people could just resist technology, well, then you won't have a problem with secularization. But I'm saying it is highly unlikely that any people will ultimately resist modern technology. Why? It inevitably brings carnal enjoyments. It brings more money. It brings leisure time. It brings an easier life, and so forth. Now, I guess things are always, relatively speaking, because if you get modern technology, then you've got all the headaches of having to fix those things that break down. But if you don't have modern technology, you go back to a very difficult day. How would you like to have gotten up this morning and fed the cows and milked the cows? You know, you had to do that. That's why church is at 11 o'clock. I mean, that's an old Revolutionary War, culturally conditioned time for church, because it's a pre-industrial vestigial remain. That's why is church at 11 o'clock? You've got to give time for the farmers to do their chores to get to church. Back in a rural society, that was just the way that it is. You couldn't have church early in the morning. Got too many chores around the farm. And it's a surprise why 11 o'clock has stayed. I guess people, although they don't milk cows anymore, they sleep longer in the morning. So 11 o'clock still fits in the morning. You know, that's church time, 11. Sunday school was 10 in our church anyway. Sunday school was 10, and church starts at 11, goes to 12. 2 hours of church. 2 hours of church and Sunday school combined. But how would you like to have gotten up and milked the cows and fed them and gotten the horses ready, and on a cold morning gotten all the blankets together and wrapped your family up? I mean, you could have gotten up, I hope you didn't do this morning, but within 15 minutes of time to go, throw a bowl of cereal down, put your clothes on, jump in the car. All right, some of you are laughing, so that is how you got here this morning. I'm saying you could have done that, though, and be here in a couple of moments. No chores to do at all. Modern technology brings, in that regard, a much, much easier life. Harder in other respects, but a much easier life. I mean, those are the facts of the matter. We're not going to be so hillbilly wise that we're going to say, well, now, we're just going to deny that's true. Oh, this is true. Modern technology brings a much easier form of living. You just can go home and relax and just turn a button in your house, and it makes the house cold or warm, and buttons make things heat up in the oven, and buttons make things, and plugs make things stay cold in the refrigerator. Easy. Just plug things, turn switches on. No crank and beat with a whip and have to go out with the sweat of your brow and breaking your own back, raising the grain to have enough to last the winter for the animals. Of course, we still got some people around who do that, but they're not very many. And what has modern technology done? But it's increased the level of productivity so much that most of us don't have to do that anymore. You can have one farmer supporting 1,000 people in the community because of modern technology, which has then produced problems for the farmers as well. There's no way out of it. As far as I can see, no one has come up with any way out of modern technology. Unless you are an old order religious group and you just live in a cave somewhere. And even those people, somehow, it seems like the spirit of secularization and secularism infiltrates even them. Because they do something. They don't own a television set maybe, but they pick up their secularism somewhere. But that is an alternative. And there are groups that do that. They have chosen this is the way to go. And as I think I've often said before, I don't find a whole lot of fault with them choosing that way. If I could choose that way in good conscience, then, you know, in my estimation, if things would work, I think that's the way that I would choose as well. Because I would simply disassociate myself from society. I'd live on a farm. There'd be no car, no television, no phone. I'd pay no income taxes. There'd be nothing like that at all. You just live out there. You have no influence from anybody except maybe people of like mind that live out there with you. Can you imagine what in one sense, a paradise that could be? No influence. No shopping at the store. No grocery shopping. No newspapers. I would really enjoy doing that. It'd be a hard life, though. That'd be a hard life to have to live. You'd build your own things. I mean, no electricity, no electrical tools. It'd be all done by hand. People that do that and enjoy that. And I don't find fault with that at all. You read some of the accounts that I've read of people like that, people that maybe live in the wilderness of Montana or something. They are happy with their life. Non-Christian people, but they're happy. They're satisfied. Maybe some of them aren't, they get back to the cities, but a lot of them, if they're going to choose that way, I hope they've counted the cost beforehand. They're satisfied with the type of life that they have. You have to be in love with nature, but at one time all people were, because everyone lived in nature. And now, you're kind of an oddball if you like nature. At one time, we all had to like it. That's where we all lived. We were all nature people. And the men knew how to do everything. The women knew how to do everything. You didn't have stores. You didn't have repairmen. You were the repairman. You were it. Everything. You or your neighbor. Well, that is one way that technology can be resisted. That's probably the most obvious and blatant way that technology can be resisted. That's not a resistance that is in your mind or your spirit or your attitude or your dependence, as we'll get to later on. That's simply a flat-out, literal, physical, bodily resistance and rejection of modern technology. And I see a lot of things in favor of that. I will share this with you. Back in my early days, I was raised in the out-of-doors. We lived in suburbia, USA. I can always tell two parts of my story. I can tell you that I was a typical American raised in suburbia, USA, because I was. But our suburb, we lived at the very, 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 very edge of a big, huge suburb. On the other side was just a vast forest and field. So I can also say that I was raised in the out-of-doors. All you had to do is jump a fence, and you went from suburbia to the out-of-doors. So it depends on what I'm trying to emphasize. I'll tell you one part or the other. But the one and only girlfriend I ever had before I met my wife, she was my second one and final one. But, back in the early love days, we were like 13, I guess, 14, right before I got saved. And we were both out-of-door type people, loved being out of doors, and I don't know that she was a hunter, fisher woman, and things like that, but I enjoyed those things. And our plans were, as soon as we got married, once we got big, grew up, got old enough, we'd get married and move to Montana, the big sky state. That was always my state, was Montana. We'd move to Montana, which is nothing but a wilderness up there, and we'd build our own cabin. We'd live way out on a stream. We'd fish out of the stream. We'd hunt bear and things like that, and that's the way we would live. Now, probably by the time we got about 18 or 19 and you start driving cars and things, we would have given up those naive notions. But that was my notion at that time. So I come from a little bit of that background, even in my pre-conversion days, of thinking of moving out to a place like that, living in a cabin, because I knew I was raised hunting and trapping animals. Most boys, whenever they're young, have a paper route they run. I never had a paper route. I had a trap line that I went out and checked every morning before school. And I enjoyed it. That was good. And I look back on that and think, because I see these little boys running around delivering papers, I'd never let my children do that. Can you believe letting them be the messenger boy for the world's garbage? I thought, when I saw a little paper boy running around doing his errand the other day, I thought, thank God I wasn't an errand boy for the world's sewer line back in my early days, that I stayed out of doors and maybe kept my mind away from some of that stuff. There are other ways you can resist, but this is one way. It'd be good if we just stopped right now and had a big open discussion about the advantages of living a type lifestyle like that. In most churches you couldn't even get away with suggesting that, except it was just a humorous illustration to use. But I think people here would take it much, much more seriously. You never would have moved out here to Vermont if you didn't. But I think that if somehow we knew the Lord was telling us to do that, I think we'd probably all be willing to do that. I might be willing to do it before he told me to do it. But I'd have to know some other things, and it's too difficult, and all the laws now, and it's just a mess. You try to live out somewhere, and you're going to have the state troopers storming and raiding in on your property to see what's going on. Oh, it'd be a mess. I mean, in the early days, you didn't have to pay taxes on anything. Land was cheap. You go buy a couple of 100 acres, or maybe the government would give it to you back in the 1860s and 70s. You could have 140 acres, just a free land. But times are different today. If you lived way up in an old hollow somewhere in a Vermont mountain, they'd think that, you were running moonshine up there or something, or harboring illegal aliens, as they term those poor people from south of the border, or something like that, that you were up to no good. I mean, what are you doing up there? This is where life is down here in the town, in the city, in the valley. What are you doing up in the mountains there? We know you're up to no good, would probably be their attitude. About the only group which has really resisted the inroads of technology is the strict Islamic fundamentalism. And you hear this all the time of Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers, with the exception of, some of your old order groups in Pennsylvania or wherever. So far, only the strict Islamic fundamentalism. And that's another interesting irony. Everybody, if you hold to something that's old, you're called a fundamentalist. And media, they love to throw this term around. Christian fundamentalists and fundamentalism and Islamic fundamentalism. Well, in one sense, it's a good term. It means you hold to the old values, the old ways of life. The strict Islamic fundamentalism of Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers has had any measure of success. That was because the Islamic leaders, Khomeini and his group, recognized that to bring in American technology, I don't know if you're familiar with Islamic religion in Iran right now, but to bring in American technology was to bring in secularization. They knew that. They were smart enough to realize that, and they didn't want it to happen. Because to bring in secularization is to bring the displacement of the old gods, is to liberate the people from their religious understanding, the old Islamic Muslim religious understanding. So to his credit, the Ayatollah Khomeini recognized this. We have to say no to technology from the West. America is the great Satan, Iran says. And in that regard, I think that they're right. We had to say no to American technology if we want to say no to secularization, which is the displacement of the old gods. Technology, I've done a lot of study in this area for these messages, but what I'm going to be saying will be rather brief. I'm summing up a lot, or we could get off on too many tangents. But let me give you how technology is often defined. A little short, easy definition, nothing complicated. It's often defined along this line. Technology is the means or activity by which man seeks to change or manipulate his environment. And most real studies on technology, and there are a lot of them, I'll give you some of them next time probably, it's defined something along this line. The means or activity by which man seeks to change or manipulate his environment. See, let me just add in an aside and get a little ahead of myself, lest you think too much in the wrong line of thought or something about what I've just said of us maybe moving out somewhere. It seems to me, from what I can understand of the world and modern technology and secularization, I don't want to have a secular mind. I don't want my children to have that. If I can keep television out of the home, if I can keep them away from the public school system, if I can keep my children away from, quote, the things and the people of the world, then I think that you can grow up in a secular environment and have still a good biblical attitude toward things. What it will come to, what it will boil down to, is your attitude and an unnecessary heightened dependence on technology that a lot of people have. There are ways around technology. You can just, for the fun of it, fool around with doing it the old way every now and then, just to keep yourself from just being swallowed by every new gadget that comes out. We got to have the newest thing because it does it the cheapest and the fastest. That's a danger to avoid. I know that sometimes for your business, you've got to have something that does it fast, but that's a danger to always be looking for whatever does it the cheapest way and the fastest way, because you've made those things the criteria of all of life then. Well, who's to say that's a worthy criteria, that should be the judge of life, of productivity? Can we do it any cheaper, any faster than this? That's not necessarily a reliable God. And I think if we think that all the time, if that is our attitude, like it is with any typical person, you can hardly fault them. That's just the environment, modern technology. You're buying into modern technology. And if you don't watch out, I think that will lead into buying into secularization as well. So we'll say more about that later on, though.
For the continuation of this
You're buying into modern technology. And if you don't watch out, I think that will lead into buying into secularization as well. So we'll say more about that later on, though. Technology is often defined along this line, the means of or activity by which man seeks to change or to manipulate his environment. Manipulate not necessarily being an evil term here, but make the environment do something other than what it would normally do. It's the art of how things get done in the physical, mechanical world. You know how we all use terms like technology, and we'd be at our wits' end to try to define it to someone. So I'm just trying to help define it briefly so you can have a feel for what we're talking about. Although you know in your mind what technology is, how would you define it to someone? It's the art, here's kind of the lay definition, it's the art of how things get done in the physical, mechanical world. The art of how things get done. We all use technology. It's the art of how things get done in the physical, mechanical world. Science and technology are not the same at all, but they have wedded to become one today. Science gave the theoretical basis for technology. Science came first, and that's why I put a lot of emphasis when we looked at a timeline of Western worldviews. The last thing we looked at was what I call the rise of modern science. The rise of modern science. That gave the theoretical basis for technology as we see it in the 20th century modern West. And I think that this ability to do things, which is what technology is, it's doing things. You don't have to think, just do things. Don't think of consequences, just do them. That this ability to do things has served to push the Christian God and message out of the picture. This is what secularization is, after all, remember. The ability to do things, the ability to rationally, physically explain things. My favorite example here concerns nature, rain and the crops. The ability to rationally and physically explain things, which has come along with the rise of modern science and modern technology, has also served to push the Christian God and message out of the picture. In an earlier day when men didn't know what caused things to happen, they either ascribed events to God or to demons, one or the other, which did what? At least it put them in a supernatural spiritual world. That was their world and their environment. Things were either caused by the devil or they were caused by God. And today, you know, if you tell someone something was caused by the devil or caused by God, they just laugh at you. Sure. That you believe in spirits, invisible spirits, supernatural causes. It's just like, where have you been all of your life? You can say, thank God I've been in the Bible.
Amen.
That's where I've been.
Thank you, Jesus.
That's something you always have to hold on to, that things are caused either by God or by the devil.
That's right.
Maybe in a roundabout way. And let's don't be like the heathen whenever, every time a leaf would turn over, they saw spirits doing that. Spirits working through the trees. We should see God in nature. In evil things, we should see the devil. In technology, we should not see God. We should see the devil. Although I couldn't get away with saying that, I know, in some places. Well, I believe we might even see the devil in modern Bible translations. We'll conclude our study of that with some statements along that line. Because the typical modern technology attitude is always more is better. More is better. More is better. Who tells you that's right, though? I just cannot believe that people accept these slogans, or accept, even if it's not a slogan, it's an attitude of the world that more is better, cheaper is better, Who's to say cheaper is better? Sometimes it proves to be wrong. You buy something cheap and you'll find out, but I know it. They mean it in a different way. Producing something for less cost is better. Well, who's to say? Maybe that will actually mean it's cheaper in the ultimate sense. Not cheaper just in what you produced, but it itself is cheaper and it's not worth what we're having to pay for it. And that's what modern technology has done. It's able to mass produce these things that are worthless, little junky trinkets that you pick up at the store. And it's just amazing how people adopt these things because we're growing up around them all the time, that more is better, faster is better, cheaper is better. And I'd like to ask them, who says? How do you know that's true? How do you know? You've accepted that. Prove to me that's true. What's your basis for that more is better? We're going to say more suicides are better, more divorces? Well, no. Well, who told you where to draw the line? You don't accept that face value all the time. More is better. More cancers in your own body are better? No. Fewer would be better as far as I'm concerned, most people. So who taught you that? Where did you get the idea more is better? And how do you know where to draw the line? I'd like to question some people on their criteria and the reasons for their criteria. And they certainly don't go for a biblical basis because the Word of God will have a lot of other and different things to say. The Word of God would have some things to say about the example I started off with of a big supermarket coming into a small town and running everybody else out of business there. Or a big chain store coming into town and running everybody else out of business. The Bible had something to say about that concerning fairness to your brother and fairness to your neighbor. And don't give me this business, well, we're fair to the community because look at the number of jobs that are created by it. That's a smokescreen there. You have heard perhaps an elderly couple who have been there for years and years. What does the Bible say about that? I guess in our modern world, in the church world, we're not in economics now and ethics. We'll be there later on. But they never think of things like that. They bought into the same spirit that's controlling the modern technological West. That if you can do it, do it. That's the attitude. If it can be done, let's figure out a way to do it. If it can be done, we'll figure out a way and we'll do it. That's all there is to it. You don't ask about morals, about moving in and doing this or buying that or building this, morals in that. There aren't any morals. Remember what the founder of McDonald's said? God, family, business, but in the workplace, those are reversed. Business, the work comes first. There are no morals in work. You do what has to be done to make a dollar, to get ahead. If it involves lying, cheating, whatever, you just do that. There are no morals involved. That's the attitude of a lot of people. Maybe people in the church wouldn't come out and say, my attitude is if you have to lie and cheat, do it. But they would never suspect that the Bible had anything to say about a big supermarket coming into a small community and running a lot of other people out of business. And I think that if nothing else, the Pentateuch is filled with legislation about fairness, about equality to your brother, to your neighbor, to those around you. Then the modern man says, well, but what am I supposed to do? Well, I don't know. I know you can't violate the Bible. I don't know. Does that mean get out of the food market business and don't operate the big chains? Maybe that's what it means. I don't know. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not in all of that. That's their own problem. They've created the problem. They've created the store. In doing that, they've created their own problem. They'll have to solve it themselves. The West has already gone through one industrial revolution. We are in the midst, many people claim, of a second one that is much more profound. The first one, the mechanical know-how, mechanization, replaced manual labor. And I think, to be sure, under the influence of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So those are things that led up to modern science and technology, as we discussed also in those messages on a timeline of Western worldviews. In the first industrial revolution, mechanization replaced manual labor. Now many claim that we are in a second, quote, industrial revolution, which is of an entirely different order. This one is now led by the computer and the microchip. It's sometimes called the information revolution. Things, to be sure, are still being done, but it's because of the amount of information that can either be stored or analyzed and synthesized. Basically, we're doing the same types of things. It's the same processes involved in the first major industrial revolution. But now we've got so much more to analyze now because of the fact that the computer can store so much and recall so much and synthesize so much. The acceleration of change and the maintaining and the consistency of the acceleration are things that are frightening. The acceleration of change, the maintaining and consistency of the acceleration of change are frightening in the modern world. You know how quickly things are outdated today. In the early days, things lasted for a long time. Nothing better, nothing else. Let alone nothing better, nothing else came along. And things are hardly in and they're out today. Just incredible, the rapidity of change today. We're not going to say a lot about computers except just a few comments here at this point, but although, of course, they are the thing of today, they appear to be the thing of the future. And again, I don't think that it's because they have any intrinsic worth or value or because they're good. It's because they're so capable, so vast, so fast, that they've surpassed the computer and the microchip, anything that we've ever had or understood before. And just because it can do that, again, don't misunderstand me, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. I think in the long run, other people have said the same thing, that computers, the microchip, will prove to our own destruction and not to our own good. But computers today are being developed no longer along the line of the human brain, of being able to store and recall material. But if you read some of the modern computer material, computers are being developed along the line of the human nervous system. Along the line of the human nervous system, to be able to respond and think and act on their own. That's generally the way that you see it explained, that they've gone beyond developing computers after the order of the human brain, but along the line of the human nervous system. Now, many people in earlier days, when computers first came out, foresaw robots controlling and all of this business. That may not be a true-to-life prediction or suspicion in earlier years. It may be something worse than that, though, as we'll say more about later on here this morning. Let's look at a couple of different attitudes, next of all. That's all of that thus far is really my introduction to technology. Next of all, I'd like to look at a couple of different attitudes which can be maintained toward modern technology. Number one, we'll say very little about this because it's the most obvious. Most people are completely in favor of it. See, you're an unusual person being where you are in a church like this where you're asked to think about these things, to evaluate that. Well, who has even thought about whether modern technology is right or wrong? It's just assumed that it's right. Again, because of the creaturely comforts that come along with modern technology. Money, leisure time, more things to spend your money on, easier life, more fun in life, not as much hardship. You can go places more quickly, cheaper, talk to people in more different places around the world at the touch of a button. So people don't even question it at all. Modern technology obviously is good. So the first attitude would be those that are in favor. Now, of course, not all really want the secularization that comes with the techno package, especially religious people, if they are faithful or orthodox at all, would not necessarily want the secularization that comes with their favorable attitude toward technology. But as I've said earlier, you cannot say yes to technology and no to secularization. They come together, hand in hand. some people in the church, many people in the church, seem willing to risk their faith for the material benefits. And that's what you're doing. When you're saying, well, I don't really want secularization or secularism, but boy, I couldn't do without this modern technology. You're saying yes to technology and no to secularization. What you're really saying is I'm willing to risk my faith for the material benefits brought by modern technology. I'm willing to risk my faith. I'm willing to risk the life and the hope of my children for modern technology. Most people in the church seem to say that. Now, again, I don't think that most people, I've never heard anybody teach on technology or secularization before. Amen. So I'm just assuming that nobody in the church really thinks about these matters. So when I say they're willing to do this, I mean it's just a part, you can see in the way they're living what they're willing to do. Probably if they're orthodox at all, they don't want to hate God or raise their children hating God. They haven't analyzed the situation. They haven't put it down on paper. They haven't thought about it. But what they're doing is they're saying through their lifestyle, I'm willing to risk my Christian faith or the hope of my children for the material benefits that are given here. I'm willing to risk their faith, sending them off to a secular school, higher education, college, so they can get a better job and make more money. I'm willing to risk their faith, their Christian faith. Of course, they won't say that. They're going to say, well, that's not a risk of your faith. There are other Christian people at secular colleges, and after all, there are Christian groups. There are parachurch ministries on Christian on secular college campuses, and they can find their Christianity there. Well, I've been to a secular school with a lot of Christian ministries there, and it doesn't work exactly like that. You don't have just a little island to yourself, and you get with your little Christians, and you just study, and you have a Christian teacher and a Christian dorm and a Christian room mother or house father and a Christian roommate. It doesn't work like that. And you say, well, what about if you go to a Christian school? Well, you have the same thing. I've been that route too. You have your drinking and your sex and your swearing and your rock and roll music and your drugs and your smoking and everything that you wouldn't expect, that you would expect at a secular place. So there's one attitude. A second attitude, and we're going to spend the rest of our time this morning on this, would be those people, a handful, who are opposed. Now, we know a lot of people in the church might be opposed to secularism and secularization. We're not talking about that. We're talking about technology, the forerunner of both of them. A handful are opposed. These are our so-called anti-technology people. Now, I would like to classify myself in this group, by the way, but we'll do it in a slightly different way later on. I would certainly classify myself in the group of an anti-technology person. These people realize that it's indisputable, but that technology has produced countless material benefits. Anti-technology people are not so backward and rural and uneducated that they deny the obvious. Okay, they realize that it's indisputable. Technology has produced countless material benefits. But they are also smart enough, unlike those just completely in favor who are duped and don't think. They are also smart enough to realize that every good has its faults. Okay? And sometimes the faults are so serious, they actually outweigh the good. Now that's an important statement, or several that I just made. I'll say that again. Anti-technology people realize that it's indisputable that technology has produced countless material benefits. Many anti-technology people participate in at least some of the material benefits. I know that I do. Everyone here evidently does. Some of the countless material benefits of modern technology. In other words, you can participate and still be anti, as we shall see later. But these anti-technology people are also smart enough to realize that every good has its fault. Sometimes the fault is so serious it actually outweighs the good. Or to give it to you as that witty, quotable British writer G.K. Chesterton said, "Nothing fails like success." And how right he was. Nothing fails like success. Read a small section from another author's book. What do we see around us in the last third of this 20th century that has produced such advances in knowledge, technology, and science? You know, these things are so good, everybody says. If they are so good, they should have been the salvation of the West then. What can we see in the midst of all of our knowledge and technology and science? I'll tell you what we see. Soaring crime rates, countless shattered families, a globe scarred by continual wars and oppression. All our knowledge has not ushered in a brave new world. It has simply increased our ability to perpetuate evil. History continues to validate the biblical account that man is by his own nature sinful. Indeed, he is imprisoned by his sin. I like what he said here in these two sentences. All our knowledge has not ushered in a brave new world. It has simply increased our ability to perpetuate evil. That's really the story of modern technology, among other things. What has it done? It's increased our ability to commit evils. We have more evils to do and more ways to do them now. You know, one of the sins of all things mentioned in the end of Romans 1, where you have that long list of all of those sins, one of the things there, I think I'm going to turn over there because we probably won't hit many verses in the Word this morning just due to the nature of what we're studying. Romans 1:29 and following, you've got a list of 23 different sins, you know, unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate. You see all those things? Now get down to the middle of verse 30, inventors of evil things. I mean, I would have to put here things like the invention of the atomic bomb. You have simply increased our ability to commit murder. One time it was a bullet per man, or generally, because firearms were so unreliable, about 15 bullets per man. It'd take 15 bullets to kill one man. Now you can drop one bomb and wipe an entire civilization out. Inventors of evil things is a sign of evil. You go back to the middle of verse 28, he talks about God giving people up, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. You see, that's American society. They do not like to retain God in their knowledge. They'll retain the Christmas myth or the Easter myth, but not God, not the God of Scripture, not the pure and holy Jesus Christ. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God, the one they say do not exist, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Wow. Okay, that's an important passage there. Because they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, he gave them up to a perverse, wicked mind. I said last time, and I quoted an article, a statement from Peter Toon's writing, that there has never been a nation in history that we know of like the modern West, which has, with full intention, knowing full well what's going on, they have excluded the deity from every aspect of life possible. That's the story of the modern West. Romans 1 is like a prediction of these people to come, our day and age, because they didn't like to retain God in their knowledge. They wanted to be liberated from their culturally conditioned, pre-civilized religious understanding of things, the myths and sagas of ancient religion, including the Old and New Testament. Because they didn't want to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them up to a reprobate, wicked, perverse mind. And then it goes on to list 23 things in 29 through 32, descriptive of these people. And one of them I find so interesting is that one in the middle of verse 30, inventors of evil things. Someone said the television set. Well, certainly so. First thing that comes to my mind is the atom bomb. In the light of what I just read, that modern technology has done nothing but given us the ability to increase, to perpetuate evil today. Surely you can do it through television, but atomic bomb, we can increase our ability to murder. With these automatic weapons now that are in the hands of all the wrong people, we can increase our capability of murdering each other. And see, modern technology gave us those things. Modern technology gives us the things that we use to destroy ourselves. What are they doing? They came out with this type of gasoline, and then, something's happening to the environment. And now you have this type of gasoline. They can't, and nothing will ever be the ultimate final cure. All the factories that produce things, you end up with waste after you produce things. What are you going to do with all that waste? A lot of it's toxic. A lot of it's very, very harmful. What are you going to do with all of that? No one really knows. You say, we're going to bury it in Vermont. Well, everyone in Vermont will be up in arms over it, all right? We'll take it to Pennsylvania. No, they'll be up in arms. All right, we're just going to put it on a barge out in the Atlantic. Well, that's what they did with New York's garbage for a while. No one wants it. And we could talk about garbage for a while. We produce so many things, and we Americans waste so much, we're running out of places to put our waste now. I have an article at home of the millions and millions and millions, to give you one example. So many in this city in Oregon that have had to close the dump down there of disposable diapers that are going into the city dump. So many untold millions, maybe billions of them, that just that one item, disposable diapers, have completely overrun, I think it's in Portland, the entire garbage area, the entire garbage dump, just for that one thing. Think of all the cans and all the trash, and I got more articles in my files of how much paper each American uses per year. I mean, it's pounds and pounds of paper. Paper in olden days, that was a precious thing. To own a scrap of paper, you would erase and reuse and erase and reuse and erase and reuse. And now, if I weighed the magazines that I read per year, now a whole lot of them I save for further reference, but most people don't. And even if I didn't save them myself, you read them that year, pounds and pounds and pounds of waste. Modern technology is a curse. Anyone who has their head screwed on right would say that. He may have different responses as to what he's going to do about it in his own life. But a person simply doesn't have their head screwed on right not to recognize this, that modern technology simply perpetuates our ability to commit evil and to do evil. Inventors of evil things. Evil things. We've invented so many evil things to destroy one another with, to destroy homes and destroy families and destroy communities with. The inroads of the modern media destroy families, destroys family time. When you find out that people are watching television like 6 and 7 hours a day, I don't even know how you find that much time. 6 and 7 hours a day for television. When father comes home, when children come home from school, it's in front of the television set. When mom gets in from half day of work, it's in front of the television set. When dad gets home from work, it's in front of the television set. And they're not in there talking with one another. They're glued like zombies to that set.
This message will be continued.